Hello world and welcome to What Does This Knob Do? Let's see if I can finally achieve my goal of releasing a new episode every week. Every week numerous new releases. Every week a new very cool patch contest and in between further actions. Keep me really busy. And actually, I also want to make music. And then there is also something like the real life. But the intent is, and I work to realize it. Today with the 6th episode and more oscillators. The letter B brings back some very interesting modules. Let's jump right in the middle with bacon music. Even the name makes you hungry and the modules are also real delights. Coupleless strong poly is, as the name implies, a module with a coupleless strong synthesis. On this interesting form of synthesis alone I could make a whole episode. And on the internet you will also find many contributions. Here only so much. It is a synthesis form which is mainly used for the simulation of stringed instruments. And just as a string does not sound when it is not vibrated, this oscillator also produces no sound when there is no signal at the trigger input. The input signal goes into the frequency input and can be tuned in the range of 1 Hz to 3160 Hz. Due to the extreme overtones of the different waveforms, pitch determination is sometimes quite difficult. In the middle position, a C3 is displayed anyway. The waveforms are selected using the packet slider. There is random, a sort of folded sine wave whose amplitude and convolution are highest at the moment of the trigger and then decreasing, changes phase and offset randomly, simulates string vibration and sounds quite realistic. With the filter A, you can make several strings out of one string. Another waveform is square. It is more like a lo-fi triangle wave in the initialized state, but becomes a rectangle when knob A is turned all the way to the right. Completely to the left, the triangle's amplitude increases and it becomes cleaner. Saw starts as a mixture of sawtooth and sine wave, turning into a cyclically phase change in sawtooth on the far right and a quasi-inverted signal on the left, but with a higher amplitude. Noisy saw adds even more noise to the already slightly rusty saw signal, but otherwise the waveforms are identical. The additional noise gain gives the impression of a vibrating string. Sin is a beautiful round sinus, which is quieter and slightly resonant right, and left louder and drier. Synth chirp is a lo-fi sine with resonance. Here you can clearly see that the knob A is turned to the right, there are more high frequencies, and turned to the left more deep. So it should probably be a band stop filter, since in the middle position both frequency ranges are reduced. Currently, Only this one filter type is implemented, but two more seem to be provided, and you can probably select this with a currently missing rotary knob. Both packet and filter A can be controlled by CV. With the also CV control level attenuator, control regulates the release time. The further the slider is turned to the right, the shorter it is. Although the oscillator is not finished yet, you can now conjure up very interesting sounds with it. From guitar to piano and harpsichord to completely synthetic sounds and bells. Everything is possible. It is important to know, however, that a change of sound does not happen immediately but fluently, which also allows great effects. To try out what is possible, I recommend again the randomize function of VCV-Rack. Also, chipwave is from Bacon Music, and again we have an exceptional oscillator. Paul Walker, the developer of these modules, obviously has a soft spot for chip sounds. The theme is here: paint your own waveform. And indeed, what we paint in the display is the waveform shown in the scope. Unfortunately, the randomize function only works on the frequency slider, and you want to practice painting. But definitely a cool idea, and the result always sounds like chipwave. Our next candidate is exotic in every way. It is the Barkas FM operator, which does not exist in the plugin manager and which has to be compiled by itself. Who does not know how to do that? I recommend the corresponding videos by Leonardo, Laguna, Ruiz. As always, you will find the link under the video. I have no idea if this oscillator is done yet, but it's definitely a fun playground right now. Of course, the first thing that strikes the eye is the look. That may not be for everyone, but in case of doubt, just change the SVG file with Inkscape. I like it that way, and somehow the design fits in too. But what is it and what does it? FM operator actually says so. It's about frequency modulation. It has 4 inputs and 4 outputs. In principle, I could therefore send in 4 different signals and distribute them to 4 sources. But of course, it is also possible to pick up an input signal in the associated output and loop it in again to switch the inputs in series or in parallel. And with trick 17, it is also possible to create a feedback loop. Of course, the output signals can also be used for CV control of the envelopes and the FM, also for pitch control or for detune. Or you control these parameters in a classic way with external controllers, such as LFO. This oscillator can be stinking boring if you like, but it gives the creative a variety of sounds that you would never have expected from the exterior alone. A true hidden champion. Let's get to a module that does not really need an introduction. The even VCO from Befaco. All VCV modules from Befaco are freely available, and they are also available as hardware for the Eurorack. The even VCO can certainly be described as a classic among the VCV modules. It was also one of the first modules. At first glance, it looks pretty unspectacular. Its range goes from C0 to C9 and is set via the large octave knob. The fine-tuning is done via the tune control and depends on the octave. Between C0 and C7, the accuracy is 1 cent. Over C8, it is 4 cents, and certain cents about C9. The pitch can also be controlled by CV, but there is no setting option. Volt per octave is the usual input, and also FM and hard sync can be controlled by CV. But also there is no internal adjustment possibility. So far the even VCO is more Spartan. The pulse width of the square wave can be controlled by CV. And there is also the PWM controller. Other waveforms are triangle, sawtooth, sine and even. The latter waveform is the peculiarity and the namesake of the oscillator, a waveform in which the even overtones are emphasized. This sounds rounder than a pulse wave, but sharper than a triangle wave. But what makes the even VCO a classic is simply its sound. It sounds warm and analog. In the oscilloscope we also see that the waveforms are not perfect, just as it should be with an analog oscillator. As mentioned in the last episode, sometimes you do not need an extremely versatile oscillator, but a reliable and good sounding module, like the even VCO. While I'm on this episode, a new oscillator has just been released by a developer I discussed in the last episode. The module is the Tachyon Entangler from 21 kHz. The Tachyon Entangler is an edge-smoothed, chaotic sync oscillator and basically consists of two palm loop oscillators. See last episode. With chaos that can be cross-synchronized for likelihood. By default, oscillator A is the master. The controls, octave, coarse and fine, are master pitch controls for both oscillators and work like the palm loop. The ratio B knob changes the frequency ratio of oscillator B with respect to the master pitch. If I turn this knob, you can hear the classic sync sound. Here I would have liked a CV control, which does not mean that it would lack it. Each oscillator, like the palm loop, has exponential and linear FM inputs and associated attenuators. In addition, both have chaos and sync controls. The chaos button introduces a random element into the oscillation, making the signal noisy. The sync knob influences the probability of one oscillator being synchronized with the other. Full counterclockwise is no synchronization, and fully clockwise is hard sync. Intermediate settings create disturbing and stuttering effects. The chaos and sync settings also have modulation inputs and associated attenuators. Each oscillator also has a volt per octave input and a reset input, which reboots the waveform each time a trigger is received. Finally, each oscillator has two outputs, saw and square. As with palm loop, the square output is tuned one octave lower. With a square signal, you can use the ratio knob to create harmonious levels, if you could control it via CV. The tachyon entangler has opened certainly a lot of potential, but it certainly takes some time to develop that. The next three modules from Bidu are also anything but standard. Although Thierry and Klakos are based on the VCO1 from Fundamental, they are far from pure copies. Common features are the pitch of 9 octaves, the fine-tuning in 2 semitone steps, the CV controllable frequency modulation, and the ability to switch between analog, warmer, and digital waveform, and hard, soft sync. The external synchronization is possible via the corresponding input, and of course there is also a volt per octave input. Like the VCO1, the waveforms are sine, triangle, sawtooth and rectangle. The special feature of the Bidu modules are the diagonal lines, because these are not just a design feature. Both oscillators are phase distortion oscillators, wherein in the starting position the phase distortion is 0 and thus the signal is linear. That is unchanged to the VCO1. The blue line passes through a coordinate system with the 0 point of both axes in the middle. So we have 4 sectors on each line, and I can click and move that line, keeping the start and end point the same and creating a kink in the line at the touch point. In the oscilloscope you can see very nicely how the wave changes, and this can be automated or controlled via the CV inputs X and Y. As a result, complex, changing waveforms are possible and thus extraordinary sounds. Klakos goes one step further and offers 4 oscillators in one module. Each oscillator has its own waveform selector, which can even be controlled via CV. Unfortunately, there are no single outputs, but only a mixed signal from all oscillators. But that is also important because the oscillator sounds very well behaved in itself, and therefore requires a good filter and a comprehensive modulation. Here is, for example, Caudal from Volt, as he provides 12 random tensions. With a 4-month oscillator fork, VCV-Rack learns to speak French. At least according to developer Sébastien Bouffier. Over the presets button, typical French vowels can be accessed. Otherwise, the pitch can be adjusted via pitch and the 4 months in 4 frequency bands, each with frequency F and gain G. This can also be controlled by CV. Formidable! The conclusion of today's episode is made by 4 oscillators from Bock Audio. VCO is a standard VCO similar to VCO1 from Fundamental. Its range is from C1 to C10, which one does not hear anymore. With a fine knob, you can detune ±1 semitone. There are 4 waveforms available: rectangle, sawtooth, triangle and sine, which can be used simultaneously. The pulse width of the square wave can be controlled by CV. Likewise, the frequency modulation, where you can decide between a linear and exponential, light and strong modulation. For external synchronization, there is also a sync input and of course a volt per octave input for the input signal. XCO could be considered the big brother. It has everything VCO has. In addition, it has a CV input for the modulation depth of the frequency modulation and offers the possibility to influence the waveforms individually and output both as a single and as a mix signal. With a controller or by CV, the proportion of waveforms on the mixed signal and their phase within the signal can be controlled. In addition, each waveform has an individual modulation type. The square wave is the pulse width, the sawtooth a saturation, the triangular wave a sample and hold, and the sine wave FM feedback. And these modulations are influenced by CV. Great! All of these options greatly enhance the normal VCO. And that's probably what the name XCO symbolizes. The agitator is, as the name implies, an additive oscillator. The output signal is the sum of up to 100 individual sine or cosine waves. The number, frequencies and amplitudes of the partials can be controlled both manually and via CV. With partials, you determine the number of partials. With 1, you have only 1 sine wave, and the further the knob is turned to the right, the more sine waves are added. Width specifies the distance of the partials in the frequency. In the middle position, each subsequent partial is 1 octave higher than the previous one. OSQ adjusts the spacing of odd-numbered partials up or down relative to width. ESQ adjusts the distance of even partials up or down relative to width. Gain controls the output level of the signal. Decay regulates the decay of the individual partials. In the middle position, the amplitudes decrease proportionally with increasing frequency. Balance cuts the amplitudes of the odd or even partials. Filter manipulates the sub-amplitudes to simulate low-pass or high-pass filter effects. And, as I said, everything can be controlled by CV. Not to mention that in addition to sine waves, also cosine waves can be added, resulting in a completely different sound. The basic operation remains the same. One to go, and that is the FMOP. Of course, this is an FM oscillator, so frequency modulation a la Yamaha DX7, where several FMOP must be connected to each other. Each individual acts as an operator of an FM algorithm. There are a few videos about the FM synthesis and what it has to do with the algorithms. Only so much at this point, the arrangement of the operators in series or parallel and the strength of the influence of operators on each other determine the algorithm and ultimately the sound. The depth and CV controls can be used to influence the input of an external FM signal on the FM input and the internal feedback of an operator, as well as the strength of the level knob adjustable output signal. The oscillator has a built-in ADSR envelope generator with which depth, feedback and level can be controlled. For this purpose, a signal must be present at the gate input and the associated button be activated under the respective controller, so that a green light is on. The sustain parameter can also be influenced by CV. Anyone who has ever created an FM sound knows how difficult it is to get the desired result. Even the smallest changes to the controller can have huge effects, because each operator influences at least one other. And it is not different here, it is even more difficult, because you have to create the algorithm yourself and see no absolute numbers of controls, only approximate knob positions. At least you can now save presets. That's ever very helpful. Whether one prefers this free architecture of FM synthesis or Dexter of Valley, which provides ready-made algorithms and still has many additional options that go far beyond FM synthesis, this is certainly a matter of taste. In any case, I think it's good that there are also such modules in VCV-Rack that require experiments and demand a lot from the user. And that's it for the 6th episode. I think there were some interesting modules and also some that are only accessible in practice. And that's what my videos are all about. And I want to initiate the process of getting closer to the modules. Therefore, this will always be just a rough overview, so you can decide if you are interested in a module or not. Tips and tricks for individual modules can be found on YouTube. Just enter the module name or VCV and voila! As always, you will find links to the most important web pages and also the developers of the modules introduced this time. I look forward to your feedback, no matter if wishes, suggestions or criticism. And not to forget, many thanks to Andrew Belt and all the module developers without whom all this would not be possible. That's it from me. Take care. Servus.